Everyone. I think most of us are loaded in. Still a couple joining, but we can get started since it's 5 after. My name's Tyler Carson. I'm a PhD candidate in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Rutgers. And this is my colleague.
My name is Anna Nath, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History. And Nama.
My name is Nama Avshalom, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Graduate School of Education.
Great. So thanks for introducing yourselves. And Anna and I think are going to be walking you through most of this, and Nama is going to do some behind the scenes work. This webinar is being recorded, so please do try to keep your microphones muted and your cameras off, just for kind of streamline and simplify things. If you have any questions that come up during the webinar, you're welcome to post them in the chat. There'll also be a Q&A towards the end of at the end of the webinar. So thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to provide a brief kind of introduction to proposal writing. The webinar should run about 45 to 50 minutes, depending on how much we talk or not. Let's jump right into it. So just a brief outline for what we'll be doing. We'll briefly go through, hopefully it's not too redundant if some of you have had meetings with us, but our grad fund mission and kind of the services we offer. Anna will be taking us through some steps to think about before you begin writing, what some typical application components look like, and then getting into the nitty-gritty around crafting a research statement, and all will loop back in to talk about actually structuring your research statement. So our grad fund mission and services. So grad fund is kind of a branch of the School of Graduate Studies, and our mission is to help students identify and apply for extramural funding. What does that mean? It means awards, fellowships, grants that are external to the university. So they're not given by your programs or by the School of Graduate Studies. They are meritorious awards that are given to you based off of your research quite often, or sometimes even just your activism, things like this. But they're related to your academic and professionalization trajectory. So since our founding in 2000, we've helped Rutgers graduate students win approximately $100 million in external support. So hopefully we can convince you by the end of this webinar to book a meeting with us, and hopefully we can support and help develop your application. So some of our core services, we offer individual meetings, which I just mentioned, from kind of just getting a sense of the landscape of what you can apply for, the tools to learn how to apply for those. Some online resources, which we'll discuss in the next slide. We offer mentoring programs in the summer quite often, sometimes during the year. And we also offer something that you're in right now, which is a workshop and presentation. So this is our website, our kind of landing page. You'll notice, so it's gradfund.rutgers.edu. You'll notice here, there's a search bar. We have over 3,000 graduate funding opportunities in this database. We are a small staff, so unfortunately, some of the hyperlinks and other kind of deadlines aren't necessarily updated all the time, but it's still a really delimited and kind of curated list. So it is a good place to start with some keywords when you're trying to search for funding. And then you can just like copy paste the name of the award into Google if the hyperlink isn't working. So this is one of the online resources I was mentioning, which I think Nama is going to try to paste this link. There we go, perfect, into the chat for all of us, which you can enroll in. It's a grad fund self-paced guide to fellowships and grant writing, or grants in general, on Canvas. And it takes you a really thoroughly through like a step-by-step process of things to think about. So I'd encourage you all to enroll in that. And kind of it's a self-paced kind of tutorial, so you can work through it at your own leisure. So just before we get started and into like proposal writing, some benefits to think about why apply for external funding, right? So most of us in the School of Graduate Studies, or many of us, right, are in doctoral programs. Some of us may be in master's degrees, which is a bit different sometimes. But for those of us in doctoral programs, many of us have internal funding, right? So we're like, why apply for external? Here are a few reasons. So the first being you can gain practice communicating your work and its significance to interdisciplinary, non-specialist audiences, right? So the PhD in particular is a kind of interesting experience because your committee is really well versed quite often in the specific conversations you're intervening in. But when you go beyond that, right, when you graduate, you're going to have to speak to a much larger and wider range of audiences. So this is kind of like the first foray or test drive into learning how to communicate your research to audiences that might still be within your field, but might also be interdisciplinary, and kind of pitching them, right? Why should they care about your research, so to speak, and how can you communicate it clearly? It's also a really good way of acquiring experience crafting application essays, right? So we'd like to say like grant writing is its own kind of genre of writing, right? And so the earlier you can become familiar with this genre and the more practice you have at it, the better it's going to serve you in the future, right? And so this links then to the third kind of reason to start applying now as opposed to later down the line, is that you can establish a track record of securing external awards, and this will help you stand out to future employers and funders, right? So your fundability, right, is sometimes dependent on the way in which other funders have, saw merit in your research, in you as an individual, and this will help kind of make you more competitive for future grants. So the final reason, right, is the most kind of basic one, is we need sometimes money, right? We need to be supported during our graduate study. So this could support like a year abroad if you're doing research. It could help you, be a completion fellowship to get you through your final year. These are all good reasons to think about applying for external funding. So I'm going to hand it over to Anna.
So, so what do we do before we begin, right? 'Cause this is a proposal writing webinar, but we can just start writing a proposal off the bat, right? We need to understand sort of where it's coming from. So I'm going to walk you through some of that. And that is getting to know your funder. As Tyler said, the funders are external to the university. They vary. They could be government organizations. They could be nonprofits. They could be a multitude of different ways that the funders commit to supporting graduate students, right? So it's really important to understand what the funder is trying to achieve. What are their mission and goals, right? Why are they trying to sponsor graduate students to write, research, travel, whatever it may be? It's important also because you can understand what the review process is like and who are the reviewers. Again, before you begin writing, it's a really, we all need to know who is looking at our stuff, who is reading our stuff. Very often you're going to have several layers of review when it comes to funders or to funding applications, right? And you might have people who are familiar with your field, not necessarily with the very sort of nitty gritty of your research, but they're really familiar with your field, right? But you can also have a level of review where people are coming from different fields and different disciplines, right? And that's the importance of sort of thinking, okay, does my proposal need to be written in an interdisciplinary way, or to be understood and to be exciting for an interdisciplinary audience, right? So that's why it's really important to understand who is doing the review process, what is the review process looks like, and that information is available usually easily available on the funder's website, right? So that's where you go to understand and to get more details. And of course, as well, if you don't find the information you're looking for, there's always a program officer whose job it is to answer questions from the potential applicants or from applicants, right? So get to them, but get answers to these questions because they're fundamentally important to the ultimate success of your written proposal. And as I said, contact information is always there. So have it handy as you begin your process. The major review components, and we're going to talk more about them, and you will see sort of as we get into the nitty-gritty, but think about it in two major ways, right? There's going to be an assessment of an intellectual merit of your research proposal, right? And there's going to be an assessment of sort of broader impacts of your proposed research, right? And it's because, again, this is beyond your discipline. This is beyond sort of academia, right? These funders are out there with their mission and goals, but usually it's to make our world a better place in one way or another, or through whichever ways they are deciding to support the graduate students. But their goals are bigger than just for you to finish your dissertation, right? So thinking about that, those are usually sort of major buckets of sort of the two components that you should be thinking about as you embark on this journey. And again, intellectual merit, simply put, right, is the evidence of your work potential to advance knowledge and move your discipline forward, right? So they do want to see that what you're writing is, interesting, groundbreaking, moves the discipline forward, etc. And then you have to remember as well that the intellectual merit of your intellectual merit, which is the sort of the personal statement, we talked about it in our previous webinar last week, right? That your intellectual merit is different from your researcher's intellectual merit. So today, again, this is about the proposal, it's about your research, but just remember that as you're writing, usually those two statements are going to be in some way, shape, or form part of any application packet. And broader impacts are about the potential to benefit society, as I said, right? And contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. And they could be very different depending, again, on the funder. So be cognizant about that, read about their mission and goals, read about sort of past recipients of the award, see what they're studying. And sometimes it helps you to sort of figure out where exactly they are if it's not precisely clear on the website. And that could be achieved through the research itself, through activities directly related to the research, right? Through activities supported by, but complementary to your project. So there's a multiple sort of ways to get at broader impacts. And it could be different for different proposals, right? There isn't one way, but you have to be thinking about that because again, it is bigger than just your research project for finishing your PhD. And again, both the potential impact of the individual you on the society and the potential impact of your research on the society, they are different. They're both important. And you need to understand sort of why it's important to actually, to focus on this area. So the application. The typical components include the research statement, or sometimes it's called the proposal, right? Which is what we're talking about today. The personal statement, transcripts, a CV, letters of recommendation, and sometimes often they will ask for a budget. Not necessarily all funders will do so, but many will. But you have to be prepared that sort of variations can be presented in multiple different ways, right? A personal statement can be combined with the statement of previous research experience, or there could be narratives that are embedded in the application as well. So we all always suggest to students to create your sort of portal profiles because everything is now done through portal and submitted electronically, right? To create your portals early on so you can look at the application in its totality and not just look at, oh, the required components are this and this, because very often really important questions are within the application itself. You could have narratives that we'll get to very similar things as personal statement that might not be named as such, right? So it's really important to get to understand from the get-go what it is that you're going to be writing. So that was kind of probably a lot, but a lot of important information, which we feel bears on how you write your proposal, how you structure it, and how you sort of relay your message. So crafting a proposal. And this is pretty sort of, these are the absolute musts and basics of sort of proposal writing. Not that any of it is easy, but these are the musts to be successful, right? A strong proposal should be clear, concise, and compelling. It needs to convey a concretely defined topic with a feasible scope. And that could be slight variations in this depending on the stage of study you're in, right? So some applications will allow you to apply from, for example, from year 1 to year 5. And of course, somebody who is applying in year 5 is going to have a very different way that they're going to be judged as far as this part, concretely defined topic, than somebody in sort of year 1, right? But again, sort of keeping in mind, what am I proposing? What exactly I'm looking for? What is my research question, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, it needs to fit your stage of study. The expectation will be different, but regardless, if you are in year 1, it will be suspicious if you have the entire project done and ready, and you're saying everything is done and I'm ready to finish, right? At the same time, if you're in year 5 and you still kind of don't know what your research question is, it's going to be problematic. So it needs to fit exactly where you are, and the reviewers will be looking at that to fit well with the funder's goals. We can't overstress this enough. This is paramount to the success of any application. And so the proposal has to fit with the funder's goals. And it needs to be free of jargon and accessible to a broad audience. And that's because, again, kind of 2 reasons here, right? Is because often the funders are interdisciplinary in nature for a reason. They're just, that's how they are, because they have broader goals than just you finishing your dissertation in your discipline, right? And because the readers are going to be coming from often different disciplines, right? So it needs to be free of jargon, because if they can't understand what you're trying to say, you didn't achieve your objective. So that's, again, something that you need to think about. Very, very important. And I'm going to turn it back to Tyler.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, so proposal structure. So here's a common structure. Again, these are just like kind of ways to get you started, right? These are not absolute structures. They're just meant to kind of help you, begin conceptualizing what this document should look like, right? A research statement. So a common structure we find is to have an introduction that often includes, but doesn't have to include, the research question and objective, right? So this can take up about 5 to 10% of your proposal. Often we see introductions that are far too long, right? And get into kind of the nitty-gritty of the research, or introductions that don't include a research question or objective. And this frustrates reviewers, right? Because they want to glean quite quickly from your introduction what it is your research is about. So it's really important that your introduction, just like, it's that saying, like, your introduction is the kind of most important thing, right? When you meet someone, same thing with proposal writing. So it should really be short, sweet, concise, clear, compelling, as Anna kind of said with the 3 C's. Next, we often find people will go into a background in significance in the humanities. This is often called a literature review. Establishing where your research fits within your field. What are the conversations other scholars are having? Why is it significant to those conversations? And in general, in terms of those broader impacts that Anna was talking about, right, to society at large. Next, and this is where the bulk of most proposals will kind of, the content of them will lie, which is in the research plan and design, right? So that includes often your methodology, your chapter outlines, if that's what you're going to do there. You know, if you have any archival trips, if this type of thing, how you're going to actually, you know, go out and do your research, so to speak. And then next, towards the end, there's these two other kind of really critical components that sometimes people overlook, right? Which is that you need to describe to the funders what research you've done up until that point, right? And that includes a time frame for what research needs to be left to do, and you know, what is the output or, you know, final project output kind of look like to get there, right? So a time frame to actually write up your dissertation. Again, that, as Anna was talking about towards the beginning, that really factors into the feasibility of the project, which is more important than I think a lot of people realize, right? Is that to really think carefully about the way in which you're organizing your timeline to make it as compelling as possible to funders to say, okay, well, if this is a dissertation completion fellowship, right, in the humanities, those are given often for 1 year to help you actually write and finish the dissertation. There's actually a good amount of work that has been done on the dissertation, including research, and not that much that needs left to be done perhaps in research, that you can actually feasibly graduate within that time, right? So that you can finish. If there's too much work, it's gonna be a big kind of red flag. Okay, so that's a structure. We'll go through a few of these. So in the introduction, right? What is your topic? What's your main argument? Why is this significant? And how will you do your research, right? Really kind of 1 to 2 sentences per these, maybe 3, depending on the question, but really short and concise, as we said, and clear. Your question and a hypothesis, right? Depending on your field, again, if you're in the sciences, you often have hypotheses. If you're in the humanities, you often have questions. Social sciences could be a combination of both. So your research question should be focused, concise, and show potential to contribute to the field, right? So you're not asking a question that has been asked 17 times and answered, right? You're really trying to maybe combine some questions or develop your own to create something, as Anna said, that's original, right? That is moving the field forward. And depending on your discipline, you may or may not have a hypothesis, right? So in the sciences, quite often, you'll be expected in grant writing to predict how you'll answer that question, or so. And what's important about that is that often you'll need a backup plan in terms of if your hypothesis doesn't play out according to what you predicted, what are you going to do in light of that, right? To move your research forward. So the background and significance section, often known, as I said, as the literature review or theoretical framework, it clarifies for the reviewer the goals, design, and contribution of your research to the field. And it shows how you'll advance the relevant discussions and debates in your field, right? By often citing literature. It's really important in these sections that you avoid the use of academic jargon, right? So again, this is where the difference comes in between writing in the PhD, quite often for graduate coursework or for our committees, and writing for external funders, right? So again, it's going to be an interdisciplinary audience. So it's really important that you're writing for all, you know, for someone outside of your field and they can understand it, right? So it's okay if there's a specific term that might be pivotal to your work, but you need to define and clearly kind of use that term, as opposed to taking for granted, like we can often, again, in our coursework or for our committee members, any terms that we just assume a reviewer would be familiar with. Okay, so research plan and design. So how will you collect your evidence and data to answer your question or test your hypothesis? If you're applying for a writing fellowship, what work has been completed and what work remains to be done? Pretty straightforward. And as I said, preliminary work preparation, again, a really important kind of section of the proposal. So why are you well prepared to carry out the proposed work? Surprisingly, graduate students often struggle with this, to actually think about this, right? But we like to really coach students through this, in that there's lots of things that you can do to establish that you are the right person to do this research, right? So what is the relevant coursework? What research trips, perhaps, or other experience with research do you have that is relevant to this proposal? What work experience or professional opportunities have you sought out in order to make you a good candidate, right? These are all things that feed into bolstering the reviewer's confidence that you can complete this project, right? And that you're a good candidate for their award, right? So as Anna was talking about before, choosing these professional or work experiences, the research, all need to be aligned with the funder's mission, right? So the fit is really important. So kind of selecting, we have those long CVs, selecting and curating these experiences based off of the funder is going to make you more competitive, right? As opposed to having, which we never advise, one statement that you're submitting to 7 different funders. It's going to be too generic, right? So it's okay to have a kind of base template, but you really need to spend the time personalizing it for each funder so that you make yourself a really good fit for them. Okay, other preliminary work and preparation, I'm getting a bit off topic. Publication, language, or skills training key contacts made, right? So if you're applying for a Fulbright to go and study in Germany, you need to provide some language kind of training, or perhaps, just note that type of thing. Same thing with key contacts, right? Are you set up to be successful? Again, that's the bottom line question that on any reviewer's mind, right? And then finally, some applications request a separate essay on previous research. This is something to note. So sometimes your research statement or proposal is going to really just focus on the dissertation, and then in a separate statement, it would be kind of what has led you up to that point, right? Sometimes that will be combined with the personal or professional goal statement. Sometimes it will be separate. As Anna said, there's a lot of variability across these awards. So just kind of making sure before you start writing, you're really taking time to go through what is expected in each document. Okay, and then finally, your timeline, right? So it should make sense in terms of the work needed to be done, as well as the fellowship/grant tenure, right? So for a completion fellowship, if you're saying that you're going to write 4 chapters in 2 months, maybe in your field that works, but in my field, it doesn't usually work like that. So it becomes important that you, again, present a reasonable and feasible timeline. And often something that's really important too that graduate students overlook is that you need to provide a compelling reason for why the work needs to be completed and funded now, right? Yes, as we said, like that for, as I said earlier, that kind of like last piece around like why apply for external funding? Well, I need funding, right? That's a good reason, definitely a good reason. This is my last year of internal funding. I need external funding to complete, but you need to provide something further than that in terms of like, what are the added benefits going to be of having and securing this external funding, right? How is the dissertation going to be improved? How is it going to give you the time and space to make a greater contribution in terms of your scholarly contribution.